Hello, my name is Gurpreet Singh, and thank you for joining us today to listen to Dr. Ram Raghavan. Ram is the co-founder of Riddlebox. He did his PhD at Manchester University in this whole area of understanding what makes organizations and teams and groups perform at an exceptional level. What are the characteristics and how can you measure them? You know, what are the appropriate measures? So fascinating area, and I'm really looking forward to this session from Ram. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised in terms of some of the insights he has, and also the relevance, particularly in the situation that we have at the moment when it comes to the pandemic and how things are affecting us today, and the potential actually as we come out of it to think differently in terms of what's important to measure, not only for welfare of people, but also actually in terms of driving exceptional performance. So I'm really looking forward to that. My name is Gurpreet Singh, and of course I'm one of the regular hosts for these webinars from Ethical Reading. As usual, I just want to give a quick update in terms of Ethical Reading. We're a fairly new social enterprise. We've been going for a couple of years. Our mission is to embed ethics into the way we live and work in Reading. We want to do that by inspiring people through events, through educational resources that we provide and training, and working with other organizations and individuals to make things happen. We're constantly growing. We now have around about 45 partners and supporters and approaching 3,000 individual members and followers. We're run entirely by volunteers. And our larger vision is really to have a whole network of cities globally that are doing what we're doing here and trying to embed ethics inside their localities. We do a whole bunch of things, and we hope you can engage with us on some of these things. Webinars, of course, like this. We have a website with lots of resources. We do meetups on a regular basis. And of course, these are online. A lot of these things are online now. Pretty much everything, in fact, given the lockdown that we have around the pandemic. So we have a meetup coming up, a couple of meetups coming up later this month. So please join us for that. We'll be having some breakfast seminars. We've developed a code of ethics. Go to our website, feel free to download it and use it. It's the one that we use. And we have a whole bunch of services and training, which also our partners that we've joined up with provide as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ram now.
Thanks, Gurpreet. Thanks for everyone who's actually listening to this webinar. Yes, performance and productivity, it's a big topic. I cannot do justice to this in 20 minutes. But however, I'll try to summarize my take on this. And please feel free to ask some questions at the end of the webinar. Now, if you're to look at the current state of play, before setting that, I want to set the context. And when I look at it, this presentation, this webinar, I can see this into three parts. The first part is where I want to set the context, which is what this slide is all about, and the next few slides are all about. And then I want to look at performance and productivity. That's the second bit. And the last bit is, having gone through this, where to from there is the question that I want to ask the participants to reflect and ponder. So when we look at the current state of play, we know that performance and productivity has not improved for several years. Now, we are, the boom and bust cycle. Every decade, there is a recession. And the next one is actually waiting for us when we emerge out of lockdown. I'm not trying to become a paranoid, preacher here, but that's how the current state of play is. Now, when we look at all this, then we start thinking, are the measures that we use really reflecting reality? Is it really reflecting the way that productivity is measured, performance is measured? And I personally feel that we are actually falling short of capturing what reality is. So I want to actually take you through this journey, and please be my guest. Now, when we talk of productivity and performance, the first thing that we see is everyone talks about it. It's not gone up. in Europe, and they're quantifying it and say it's roughly $7 trillion are lost globally every year because of productivity. That's a big number. Then we talk about change initiatives, because that's another big area in organization. We are always going through a lot of change, and a staggering 72% of change initiatives fail because people are not buying into it. And there is a link between people and productivity, which we will explore a bit later. And when we talk of performance, again, people are talking about fractured relationships in teams and customer experience that's hampering it. And this was an interesting insight. 75% of the brands do not know what engagement is, but still are measuring it. And that's the challenge. When we try to measure something, we need to understand what it actually means. And without understanding what it actually means, without having a global definition or understanding, we all end up measuring various parts of it. As such, we live in a complex society. So when you try to measure something which is partial, then what you try to do with that data then yields results which are not coherent to what you want to achieve. Now, I want to actually take you through the evolution of economy and how that has actually impacted productivity and performance metrics going forward. Before machines were invented, we were living in the agricultural economy. There, productivity and performance was straightforward. You work hard, tick. You get the fruits of your labor, performance is a tick. That's how it was. So performance and productivity was very, very easily quantifiable there. Now, we had the industrial economy. Industrial economy is basically machines were introduced to reduce human effort, which means people started focusing on more of productivity and efficiency and effectiveness from a process point of view, because the human was trying to, the metrics that we were measuring humans' performance was taking a backseat here. So it started off with time and motion studies and various other metrics. Then we realized quickly that people can replicate things. Only thing that can differentiate is the service. And service then brings the question of how do we get the best out of people by providing greater service. So you had initiatives like total quality management, ServQual, EFQM, various other bits and pieces that came in, which were driven from a process perspective, although people were expected to deliver them, and metrics were developed around that. Then we had the knowledge economy. Now, if you look at the knowledge economy, it's where we said, okay, we don't need people. Everything is going online. It's about eyeballs. It's about tracking. It's about various other things which don't involve physical space and so on and so forth. Now, to make that more effective, there were various other metrics that were introduced. And again, every change that was brought in from a process point of view with a view of enhancing performance and productivity. There you had measures like Kaizen, Six Sigma, and we still follow quite a few of these even to date. And with a lot of knowledge, we've started gaining insights. And that insight basically has helped us develop various tools and techniques. And that basically has made us realize that, people are the ones who are actually going to help deliver value, differentiate value, enhance performance. And as it is, we live in a connected world. And what we live at this particular point in time, this is called the social economy. And people or their contribution becomes more prominent. If you look at it from agriculture, where we had a very clear metric on productivity and performance started morphing into a process-driven initiative or process-driven approach when the industrial economy started. But then we try to bring the human element back by looking at service, but still resorted to using the process measures to help enhance human performance and productivity. Now we are at a stage where we are at the age where everyone is connected, everything is connected. So the metrics that we're using is then becoming a more difficult proposition to measure the value people are bringing to the equation. Now, Since the dawn of industrial age, we've had consultants and a lot of research that is going on. So we have had accumulated immense knowledge on processes. And as a result, we know what to measure, how to measure everything and anything that moves, shakes, wobbles from a process efficiency and effectiveness point of view. But when it comes to people, we struggle. And in this day and age, it's the people that actually differentiate. And it's always been the people. So when you talk of productivity and performance, they were two different things. Productivity was focused around people, and performance was the end result. It got morphed, and now we are finding it difficult to untangle that. And when we try to untangle something which we don't understand, we then say, okay, let's not really bother about it. We'll quantify it as an intangible asset, call it goodwill, or a fluffy, stuffy thing which we can shove under the carpet and ignore about it. We've been doing it for quite some time, but now things are changing. We are seeing that approach is not actually yielding the results that we want. The reality is the measures that we're using to measure productivity is dated. It's like using a scalpel to cut a bone instead of using a bone saw. Now, that begs the question is, are you treating the problem or the symptom? When you look at it, performance is the symptom. The problem, if you call it as productivity, we need to understand what causes the productivity challenge. So when we start measuring it, we need to actually be absolutely clear on what performance is, what productivity is. So I'm going to break this presentation into two halves. I'm going to look at what is the productivity challenge and what is the performance challenge and how are we currently measuring it, and then take it from there. Now, when we talk about performance, the traditional approach is, okay, to change performance, we have to change the behavior of people, or we bring in consultants. And when we bring in consultants, they try to change the process, or they try to change the people, which I call as the humanics and the mechanics. Now, any process that is brought in is there to change the way people behave to achieve the end result. And that's how it's always been seen. Now, because of our existing knowledge on processes, we have become masters in mechanics. We could measure everything. But then where we struggle is people. If they don't adapt or adopt the processes, the behavior is not going to change. And if the behavior doesn't change, we know that it's going to impact performance. So 40, 50 years ago, when this was, reaching a point where people were struggling, they started measuring engagement. So if an individual is engaged, the theory is that would then get them to adopt and adapt the processes which would help them to change the behavior, to change performance. And we have been measuring engagement for 40 years. That's fine. And yes, initially there were some gains, but now it's reached a stage where measuring engagement alone is not enough. And what are we trying to achieve here is the question that we need to ask. Before I go to the next slide, I just want you to reflect on this. Every decision we take is a feeling justified by logic. Why am I saying this? Because when we talk about engagement, it's how we think, what it's reflecting on our thinking, and that's influenced by something much deeper. Now, people that have read Daniel Kahneman's book on, he talks of system 1 and system 2 thinking, that's the conscious and the subconscious, the rational and the emotional. He says both operate in tandem. Subconscious takes over for basic routine tasks. And there are people who buy into it. And then there are a lot of people who say, no, you know what? I am not an emotional person. I am a rational person. I would like to challenge that, because as human beings, we are wired to actually be emotional. You cannot be absolutely rational. Even someone who believes in numbers, someone who actually relies on spreadsheets to make a decision, ultimately makes that call based on the spreadsheet to do something or not to do that particular thing. The call to either proceed or not proceed is taken by your gut feeling. Your spreadsheet, one piece of data can vary, and if that varies, it can mess up the whole model that you have. So ultimately, you make the call based on that. So we use the rational thinking aspect as the comfort blanket to justify our emotional decisions that we take. And that's how we all operate as human beings. Now, why am I saying this? When we then take this insight to understand what performance is, we said that performance is basically the result of the behavior, which basically is the result of the engagement or the lack of, which is a way in which it's been predicted. And if you look at it like an iceberg, you see performance, you can see people's behavior. Whereas just below the surface of the iceberg is the engagement. It's how you think. You cannot see how people think, but you can see how they behave. And as a result, you start making judgment calls about their engagement. Now, how we think, as I told earlier, is influenced by how we feel. And that primarily is influenced by the values and the relationships that we have with people. Now, if you are to walk through this, you will not perform if you don't demonstrate the right behavior, and you will not demonstrate the right behavior if you're not engaged with that particular process or activity that you're expected to deliver. You will not be engaged if you don't feel that it is worthwhile doing it, and you will not feel part of that because of the relationships that you have with your people, your manager, your team, your organization. So that's the whole line of thinking. We are currently focusing on engagement, but if problem of performance, we need to go a bit deeper. Now, what I was talking of earlier, the first thing we need to do is replace performance with the word productivity, because we're talking of people here, and people are going to be influenced by processes and other result of the engagement levels that they have. And the engagement, as I told earlier, is influenced by the experience they have in the organization. Now, it's interesting because earlier, when we talked about the economies, when we talked about the service economy, customer experience became a clear, differentiator. But when we talk about people, we were still talking about employee engagement. In the recent past, which is probably the last 2 or 3 years, we have started talking about employee experience. Now, that's kind of, a leveler, because earlier you were measuring employee engagement, then measuring customer experience, which are operating at 2 different levels, and then trying to understand how one impacts other. So it was becoming more difficult to correlate performance and so on and so forth. And engagement ultimately is just the end result, not the core. So by understanding how people feel internally or externally, we can start developing a measure for productivity, which is much more relevant and which will reflect reality. And to do that, we need to understand relationships. And relationships are driven by our core values. I mean, without going too much into it, my PhD thesis was around this area. And then I realized that fundamentally, there are 3 or 4 core values that we rely on, and we build our other values around it. I'm happy to have this call later after the presentation or offline to share some insights about that. But that's where it is. It's values that drive how we feel, which then influences how we think, which then influences our behavior, which enhances productivity. So if you are looking at productivity measures, you cannot ignore people contribution. It's not a process measure. It's got to be a measure of people and process. And that's what we need to start looking at. The next bit, performance. There are various things that we can actually look at. When we talk of performance, what do we mean by it? That's the first question that comes to my mind. Are we talking about performance from a growth point of view? What is it? And the interesting thing is when we start looking for a definition of what performance is in the academic literature, you don't see a single unified way of defining it. Again, which goes back to show that if there is not enough clarity on what is relevant, what we think is important, and how it needs to be measured, we are all going to be measuring various things. Is it financial performance that matters? Of course, when we talk of performance at the moment, it's top line, bottom line, share value, your gross operating profit, EBITDA, return on investment, various metrics which are all driven financially. But we know that performance is impacted by people's productivity. So when you are measuring productivity in the wrong way, how can you actually justify the measures that you're actually demonstrating or showing as performance to reflect what really happens? That's the thing which we all need to start reflecting. We need to start asking the question, is this real? And what are the things that we can include in the performance measure? So which then moves us to the next bit. Should it be only a quantitative metric? Because people contribution, and there are various other things that contribute to performance, we are probably not considering it at all. We can't lump it as goodwill or intangible assets anymore. You need to find a scientific way to break it down to understand the people contribution. For example, brand valuation. I'm sure there's a lot of science behind it. How does that impact performance? That's something which we need to start using. If brand valuation is a very robust way of measuring something intangible, why can't we start using things like that to measure the value of people and then start using that as part of the performance metric? I know that in 2002, 2003, Tony Blair announced that we are going to measure people value and have it as part of the annual reports. It didn't take off, but that would have been the right way to move things forward. The last bit is the question, why are we doing this? What do you mean by performance? And why are we measuring performance? That's the big question that we need to ask. What is it actually going to reflect? Is it about growth? Is it beyond growth? Is it personal growth? What is that? At this point in time, we are running behind a number. And we now know having just a number is not enough. Which then brings us back to some basic questions. If you look at performance, at the moment, let's take the share market. It's ruled by fear and speculation. The markets react. That's what we hear. No one is doing any business at this point in time. Still, the value of shares are going down. You start realizing it's basically the fear of unknown which is causing people to react. And if you are going to be relying on a feeling to evaluate the value of shares, and then you're using a tangible metric like your performance indicator or your top line performance, which is supposed to be a rational way of doing and measuring things, there seems to be a disconnect there. You're saying I'm doing things rationally, but then you're doing it, the evaluation, the way you do business, the way you value companies, the way you approach the whole concept of performance is driven by fear. And that's not the right thing. If you're looking at performance, you need to actually look at it from a point of view of progress. This then goes back to what I said earlier. What are we measuring? We talked about performance as the symptom, productivity as the problem, but then the root cause, we need to understand that. And the macro picture is we are measuring performance for what? You tend to a garden, you grow an apple tree, and the apple, when you have an apple, why do you do that? A, for your gratification, B, to consume that apple. So progress is what actually drives this. If you look at performance, is financial performance just enough to demonstrate that we are moving in the right direction? As a society, we need to progress. And if you are saying there's going to be a boom and bust cycle every decade, where is progress? That's the first question. And if you're talking about progress, and if you're looking at reality, we have actually progressed as human beings. Where is that progress data or progress value created out of that progress captured? That's not actually reflecting in reality. There are so many things that an organization does. Like, for example, you have healthcare companies that come up with innovative vaccines. That's progress. Of course, it will be rewarded with some, remuneration and, growth and performance financially. But then how is it impacting the society? That invention, because that invention is helping the society move in a different direction. We are facing this uncertainty at the moment from the lockdown because we don't have a vaccine. So if a company that invents vaccine helps us get out, how can we quantify the value that that action has actually created? At the moment, the answer is a big no. We don't have a way to do that. Yes, we rely on some basic financial measures, but that is not enough. The next question that comes up is, what's the purpose of the organization? An organization does not exist on its own. It needs consumers. It is a collection of people to deliver a product or a service for organization. So the purpose of the organization has to reflect and resonate, and that's got to be embedded as part of the performance metric. At the moment, I don't see that happening. So just reflecting on this, we can see that productivity, we need to start focusing on measuring the value people add. Performance, we need to start moving beyond financial performance and start looking at various other metrics which can give us a bigger picture. And there are companies, there are initiatives that are going on at the moment. I'm not saying there's no approach, like CSR initiatives were started, but then now you have the ESG index. And people would have heard of the triple bottom line. It's been there since late 90s. Now it's starting to gain currency. Now, when you start looking at all this, yes, the society is evolving. We are not looking at just financial performance, but we just started the journey. My take on it is, at the moment, we have measures that are independent. A connected world needs a connected measure. And that's where we need to start thinking about it. I love this concept of Ikigai. Where it's not just about us. It's not about me. It's about us and the society. I know a lot of Japanese firms that have embraced this, and I know that they are actually putting in measures to actually measure certain things from this particular perspective, quant and qual measures, which is where the world is actually moving to. So that's where we should be heading towards. Now, we are all in a lockdown. What has the lockdown taught us? It has taught us that we crave for connections. We need people. And that basically tells us we are driven emotionally. We have realized progress is not about financial success alone. As an individual, if you're not going out, if you have been earning money, it's sitting there in your bank, basic needs are met. So it's not just financial measures that matter. We've realized that we need people, and as a result, our outlook to work has changed, and it is changing. It will be shaped. Now, do we start seeing work as a means to an end, or work as an element that defines us? So that's going to change. Remote working has become the norm. I know Tata Consultancy Services has asked 70% of its workforce to work from home for at least the next year or so. So it's becoming a norm rather than a perk. So when that happens, you're now starting to look at putting people before profits. And we all realize that when we come out of this lockdown, there's going to be an impact, which we call recession. Now, that is again a big question, which we can talk about later. But then that means there's not going to be any guarantee for jobs. So people are going to have more than one job. Gig economy is going to be a big thing. So this is what the lockdown has taught us. Now, what are we going to do as a result? That's the big question. I would actually start asking and probably saying that human beings are very good at reflecting, but when it comes to acting, only 5 to 10% actually go and do things that really matter. So that's what I would call as the corporate trance. And what do I mean by that? There's a concept called hypnotic paradox. As human beings, we are all drawn towards the different things. The next shiny thing is what makes us go towards that. But then we always go back and do the familiar. We are afraid to do things differently. And when that is true for every individual, and when an individual comes into an organization, which is a collection of people, the hypnotic paradox then becomes a corporate trance. So you then groupthink influences and you start doing the things that you've always been doing, the way you've always done, rather than reflecting on what you have learned and applying it. Lockdown has got us to reflect. And the question that I have is, will we bring this newfound clarity to evaluate productivity and performance? Only time will tell.
Well, thanks very much, Ram. I just wanted to finish off the session and just mention about Riddlebox. They've been going since 2012, as you can see. Importantly, there's contact details for Ram there. So if you do have any questions or queries about some of the things that he said, please do contact Ram. You've got his email address and phone number there, and you've seen some of the organizations that he's been engaged with around the topic of business performance and relating it to employee and customer experience. Now, before you go, we are always very keen to continue to improve what we do. So it's really, really important that you fill in the evaluation form. You will get an email after this session in due course. Please do fill that out. It really does help us. All of the webinars, including this one, are up on our YouTube channel. Please go up there. You can replay them on demand. And we're on a mission to increase the number of subscribers. So if you like what you see, please do subscribe. So that will help us a lot. And do join the movement. You can go to our website and you can follow us on the social media channels as you see there. And we'd really like to thank our partners and supporting us for doing and enabling what we do in webinars like this that we put on for everyone. If you do have a bit of time and you would like to ask some questions to Ram now, please do hang around, but I do appreciate other people may have to get back to their tasks. So we'll keep the session open if you would like to stay. Thank you very much.